basically, if you're playing a text-based adventure game, you need like a pen and paper with you writing down everything you see, where it was, where you've been, just so you can keep track for yourself, because the game's not going to do it for you.
Which, oddly enough, would mean my mother would have been phenomenal at them. I got her into the Ace Attorney games, and one day I was home while she was playing one of them, and I kind of watched her for a second, and then I realized she had like a piece of paper next to her, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "I'm taking notes in case it comes up later."
That is amazing.
And I'm like, how are you smarter than me in figuring that out?
It's the stenographer of the Ace Attorney games.
Unsung hero.
Just a reminder, this is a spoiler-heavy podcast. Different series that require a spoiler warning will be in the description.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Gaming Theater Podcast. Today's episode is going to be all about a brief history on the point-click adventure genre. To help me out with this, I got a couple of guests on here that's going to, I'll introduce them real quick, and then we'll go on to let us know about the point-click genre. Once again, my name is Leo, and I am your host, Geek Scorpio. And over to my right is...
Hello, everybody. We're back. I'm back, and I brought a friend with me this time. If you don't remember me, I was on the crossover episode, and I am from Standby Line. We're a podcast that talks about theme parks, usually Disney, but there's an odd amount of Six Flags in there. Like we hit a period for a little while where we talked about a lot of Six Flags. So if you like Six Flags, you're going to like that period of our content.
That sounds like a fun period to go with, AJ. All right.
Is it true that you met the dancing man himself?
I wish.
You've spoken of myth and legend, though.
That's on my bucket list right there.
To immediately get off topic, one time when I was a kid, we were going with Great Adventure, and my brother, who's probably 6 years old at the time, he said, "So when does the bus come?" He thought that when you went to Six Flags, the bus with the old man came to your house.
Oh
Man, I wish.
That being said, why don't you introduce yourself real quick, Dip?
Tim, and I'm the other half of Standby Line. And by other half, I do all the technical stuff.
He does. I just sit there and look pretty.
I doesn't look pretty on this one. That being said, and well, over to my left is going to be...
Hello, my name is Dane. I go by DandDaine on the internet. I am a Twitch streamer for charity, a TTRPG enthusiast, video game player, and you've probably heard my voice on other recordings if you've listened to anything by us here at Gaming Theater Presents.
With that being said, let's take a quick trip over to the magical merch booth. Yay! Here we are in the magical merch booth. Now, with us today is our special guest from Standby Line. Let's hear a little bit about what their podcast is all about.
So yeah, we are a we talk about theme parks and related media theme park related media, the history of rides, current events, how things have evolved over time. Honestly, we just say a lot of nonsense and hopes that at some point you're entertained.
We at one point went on a 20-minute tirade about the politics of Epcot 96 and the fact that Barbie may or may not be a tyrannical dictator.
Barbie Mayer, you say?
Most of the evidence points to yes.
It does indeed point to yes.
I don't remember that doll clothing line going out.
Yeah, the little-known Hugo Boss collaboration.
All right. But yeah, check them out. They're a really fun cast. It's a fun time, especially if you want to hear more about things. And apparently went on a large tirade about Six Flags at one point. Just, that was a thing. Also, surprisingly, this the theme parks will come up as a big deal for awful lot of our subject today. All right. That being said, let's go back to the show. So on today's episode, we're going to talk about a brief history of the point-click adventure game. The reason why I bring this up is especially for our fans who have listened to this for a while, or if you're just popping into this, we explore a lot of different aspects, especially in video games, stories, books, and about stories and storytelling. If there's one genre of a video game that is almost entirely storytelling, it's got to be the point-click adventure genre. And this genre has actually been around since almost the beginning, depending on how you define where's the early beginning ends of the PC age of computer games. But I digress. So we'll get into that right now. So the point-click adventure genre kind of starts with one particular person on there, but to get to where we're at there, we have to go into a subgenre of that. So in adventure games, there's usually they were games back in the day where you would go in, and if you loaded it up, it would just be text upon text about describing what this adventure is. And then when you read through the text, you would actually have to pick an option for it. So you would read all this text about you are lost in this forest. You can travel north, south, east, or a well. And then you would type out the command, go east, and now you're traveling east. The next time you're playing, you might type out a command that says, look in well. And now you're looking inside the well. There could be other stuff in there. And it's very much a choose your own adventure game on that style. There's just anyone who's played it back in the day, like one of the biggest ones is Zork. Well, that's how Zork started. Eaten by a grue is a thing you do in that.
Now, what is a grue?
You know what? I don't know.
Good
How to use your
question.
imagination for this kind of thing.
Ironically enough,
It's something that eats you.
Oh,
I don't think we need to know much more than that.
you got me there.
I do know that I started playing Zork. I tried the original text adventure Zork. That is hard. But also at the same time, when I first got into Zork, it was when Zork moved on to being a point-click adventure game. And I screwed up that point-click adventure game really badly. But I took a photo of nearly half the cast by accident. So that's a thing. I got stuck in a town, but everyone's picture is getting taken. Now, that being said, there's other famous text adventure games. And text adventure games are just what it says on the tin. You have adventure entirely on text. You read the text, and you kind of pick and choose which ones there are. Now, what becomes problematic for this is how the player interprets it. Kind of like reading any kind of book, different people might visualize in their imagination different things that are happening on there, and because of that, a lot of people who make text-based adventure games can kind of seem vindictive and mean, or because here's sort of the big problem with this. If you have to type out whatever sentence or adjective that you need, does the game understand that this is the sentence or adjective that you are trying to talk about? Let's say I am going to need to give a candle to Dane as part of this puzzle. However, what I as the programmer put in there is hand Dane a candle. So if you, AJ, are typing it out you may just put in give candle to Dane, and the game will be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Nobody told me about this. And so you're going through a list of adjectives until you figure out what's going on. And sometimes there are little things put into a game that makes it even crueler in some cases. Famously, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy text adventure game is notoriously like one of the hardest text adventure games that you could ever play. There's a puzzle called the Babelfish puzzle that was so complicated that back in the day there used to be a shirt that you could special order if you from them if you could give proof that you beat the Babelfish puzzle. The other thing on that is, so, and this is a spoiler heavy podcast, and also this is an ancient game, so that's on you on this. So let me picture this, okay? Have we all known what the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is, the book, right? Or the movie?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. For those on the audience who don't know, Arthur Dent's the main character. Arthur Dent has got his house is about to get destroyed, but at the same time, the planet's about to get destroyed at the same time. Now, in the text adventure game, you are playing different chapters of the book itself. So here's how it works. When you are about to leave to go to meet up with Lord Prefect, your friend, who's going to get you off the planet, you have an X amount of time to, and they measure time by you making moves. So every time you type in something that moves your character from one room to another, at least in dialogue, you have moved and time has passed. you have a short amount of time before the planet's going to get blown up. So what you have to do is go back to the house, and you have to figure out, and you have to find a bunch of items that are randomly in your house. Okay? Do you know what items they are? No. You have to explore the house, figure out which rooms have what items, and they're random items. I think one of them is a toothbrush. Another one is like some tape. Another one is like a toaster, and you just start grabbing random items on there. Okay? Here's where it becomes cruel and mean. If you are running out of time, you need to get off the planet. That's the situation here. At the end of the game, Marvin, a robot that's been following you, will ask you for a tool. One of the tools is tied to a number key. However, there are 11 objects you need to find in the house before you got there, and if you didn't have enough time to get all 11 objects, Marvin will specifically ask you for the one object you never got. Every time.
Oh, that is sadistic.
That's cruel.
In fact, there's a reason why adventure games are considered to be super hard. Puzzles like this because there's things in there that if you don't do, you can't solve a puzzle later in the game to get through that.
Yeah, soft locks are like part and parcel of the experience.
It's why I sort of think that not just because of the graphical capabilities evolving. It's why text-based adventure games kind of fell out of favor. The player so much, and they have to base their actions based on the intent and verbiage of the developers, whose intentions one way or another may not be entirely clear. So basically, if you're playing a text-based adventure game, you need like a pen and paper with you writing down everything you see, where it was, where you've been, just so you can keep track of yourself, because the game's not going to do it for you.
Which, oddly enough, would mean my mother would have been phenomenal at them. I got her into the Ace Attorney games, and one day I was home while she was playing one of them, and I kind of watched her for a second, and then I realized she had like a piece of paper next to her, and I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm taking notes in case it comes up later.
That is amazing.
And I'm like, how are you smarter than me in figuring that out?
It's the stenographer of the Ace Attorney games.
Unsung hero.
So we move on to, this is sort of just the norm of how text adventures were. And text adventures are a big thing, and they had their audience, but it was almost like if you were getting a text adventure, you had to be fairly highbrow, or at least it was like a significant, I have a computer. I also have this text adventure game. My intelligence is so much higher than yours. No, it's a lot of times it's just misreading the entirety of the intent of the whole thing. And that's a thing that can happen. But we go into Sierra. I think the name of the company is Sierra Online. There's always been Sierra Online, or they just called themselves Sierra.
I think they were just Sierra at the time.
I think they were Sierra originally, and then they pivoted to being Sierra Online after a couple of games.
Yeah, I was trying to remember which way it goes, because it's Sierra or Sierra Online at some point.
Yeah, I think they started as just Sierra, then they pivot to online after like 2 or 3 games, because that's when I think that's when IBM rocks up with all the money.
Yes. Now the reason why we're bringing this up is because we bump into, basically, for game historians out there, is sometimes known as the godmother of video game design. And it's a person whose name is Roberta Williams. Roberta Williams comes up with an art-based concept to work with her husband into building and designing story-based games, specifically text adventure games. What she ends up designing is what's considered by many, depending on who you talk to, the very first point-and-click adventure game. And it's a horror game called The Mystery House, where you would explore this house, very Scooby-Doo-esque. But the thing is that it would use vector graphics. For those who are not in the know, a vector graphic means it just draws lines into a place, and those lines draw out a picture for yourself. So you have a picture of lines put together on that. Vector graphics have become fairly revolutionary, because that's what is the start of doing a first-person shooter games, is designed entirely in vector graphics. So it's all just vector lines. So she uses this program to make these vector lines to design it so that way the game would automatically, when you're in a new room, draw the room. So now you have a visual aid to help you out with what's in this room. You don't need to guesswork what else is in this room or try to search for it, because you can actually see what's there. Is there a plant in this room? No, I'm not going to bother to ask him. Is there a plant in this room? It's already there. So this lets you build to explore and find these rooms and things for it. But her most famous contribution is she's the designer for the King's Quest series and started King's Quest. The coolest thing about that is the game could not handle originally until they figured out a way to work around it. That when you traveled from one room to another room, the game would automatically start drawing physically the entire game. The best way I can describe it is imagine running a point-and-click adventure game using MS Paint. And you would basically load the paint file, and it has to draw everything individually each and every time whenever you go from one room to another. She designed that to make that work. So that way you had these bright colors, these visual aids for yourself. And King's Quest is notorious for needing these things so you can see what you're doing. Also, King's Quest is also notorious for having a puzzle later in the game that you need an item from the beginning of the game to solve. Like, that's a motif.
Yeah. That's what always makes it so funny to me that people speedrun it, is you have to specifically route to pick that up, or guess what?
Mm-hmm.
Hope you enjoyed this attempt, because you're going to need another one.
There was one of the King's Quests, I'm trying to remember, where it was hilariously. You were, I think it's one like 3 or 4, one of the later ones, because you were in a lot of the King's Quest games will have puns in there from different fairy tales. So one of them is you're in the dwarves chamber that from Cinderella, or not Cinderella, sorry, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But you find a bunch of diamonds in there, and you need this diamond for a later puzzle. But if you're a nice person, you would give the diamond back to the dwarf, and then your game soft locks, and now you can't beat it because you needed that diamond later in the game. What's also interesting is that these are sort of the things that were up. Now, it's kind of, we're in the early to mid 80s at this point, but here's sort of where, if you've noticed, we bump into an issue with this one. There is a difficulty curve with any of these puzzle games, because it's ultimately you're an adventure game. Point-and-click adventure game is almost like an escape room puzzle that you have to deal with, like in the virtual world. However, some of these games have some of the highest difficulties that I've seen in a game. One of the hilarious series is like Leisure Suit Larry games, the original text-based adventure games on that one.
Oh yeah.
So I think the first one was because what happens is you'd be able to point around and click, which is why they're called point-click adventure games. But they still had to give you a text box that you had to completely fill out the text in there. And Leisure Suit Larry does not get rid of that, even in the heyday of a point-and-click adventure games. Like, there's puzzles that you still have to type a message in, even though there's an easier way to get around it, which becomes messy.
Yeah, and a lot of that is because the way a lot of early point-and-click games formed themselves was off of the engine used for text-based adventure games.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, it's basically just adding vector graphics. So over time, as the games start to develop, they're still using this engine from like the original like Adventure, which is like, I want to say like 1980 dead on.
Almost, yeah, for Adventure.
And that engine, like it's just it stays there until like 8-9 years later, when somebody finally goes, hey, we should probably develop something new to run these games off of. So we're not using the system that worked when all we had were letters on a screen.
Yeah, because it's what is also known as false difficulty. It's the game itself isn't hard. You don't have the tools to be able to do what you need to do. And we're talking about, and we've talked about this way back in season 1, episode 3 about the difficulty of video games. Sometimes that difficulty is there because of simply programming requirements. Like, we have to put in so much to make the game work. We don't, or out of room or out of space to be able to make everything work that we need it to. Other times it's something like this. The engine itself can't handle what we're trying to do, so it's got a limitation for it. Or we just don't have the commands that we need to on this.
That's going to be a continuing theme, basically, throughout at least the 90s. You could argue the early 2000s, but like when you get to like the revival of point-and-click adventures, they basically done away with this. But let's say, for example, in order to solve a puzzle, you need a key to get through a door. And the key is in a place where it's in one of the initial rooms where you start the game. But due to circumstances, very early in the game, you are blocked off from returning to that point. So if you didn't get the key at the beginning of the game, you're done. There's no way to win.
Yeah, and sometimes that's just the
that
game.
That trend doesn't change at all.
kind of. We'll get to that part in a second because when we get a big game changer, a literal game changer on that one. But yeah, so there's some games that were so notoriously difficultly hard. Space Quest series actually had like a stockpile of times that you could kill yourself in there, and it was just okay. I'm a bumbling janitor that's in space. Oh no, there's alarms going out there. I'm going to go drink. I have to make my way through this. Oh, there's a bottle of water. I'll drink it. Turns out the water's acid. I killed myself.
Yeah, and Space Quest entirely did it just to mess with you too at a certain point. Because all the deaths had some kind of like clever joke, which ultimately ended up becoming a bit of a running trend in its own right.
But these deaths of yourself is just, I'm just trying to figure out my way around this game, and now I've accidentally killed myself 27 different times. And it gets kind of exhausting on this. So what we have to bump into here is the literal game changer of games. Deep down in the history of video games, there's going to be there's surprisingly not a whole lot of them that you can actually say revolutionized the game industry. Super Mario Brothers for example, is just a traveling jumping adventure game, but it's more famous for saving the gaming industry than it is for being a game itself, even though it's a very good game. Same with Doom made first-person shooters big, even though we've had first-person shooters before that. Halo got rid of the shield, got rid of the health system in place for a shield system, which is why you can have these speed arcade-like shooters for like Call of Duty and such. Final Fantasy VII, for example, hugely revolutionized the RPG world, but most of it is by integrating high-end graphics for it, even though RPGs have been around for a while. This game, though, on the other hand, is on that pedestal, I think, which is Maniac Mansion. So Maniac Mansion has a completely different game engine called the Scum engine. And the Scum engine is actually a sort of an acronym. It's short for Script Creation Unity. Is that it? Or Utility?
Utility.
Okay, Script Creation Utility for Maniac Mansion. It's specifically an engine designed specifically for this. So what this revolutionized is, normally in an adventure game, you have to type out your command to tell the game what it is. This doesn't do that. This gives you the list of all the commands you will ever need in this game at any point in time. So Maniac Mansion also is one of the first or earliest games that have multiple endings for it. There is different ways to beat this game depending on which people that you picked. Because the way in the game Maniac Mansion works is you have the main character, Dave, who has to go into this creepy mansion to save his girlfriend. Very 80s cliche schlock on this, and they knew it going in. In fact, when this game gets ported, the only thing they changed was they updated the graphics to be ported into the NES, onto the Nintendo, and at that point, they also added the soundtrack. But since the original game didn't have a soundtrack, they actually added an extra item for every character, which is a CD player with their own individual soundtrack.
That's awesome.
But the original game doesn't have sound. It doesn't have that soundtrack on there, which I thought was funny. And this is where so you pick two characters. There is Bernard, who's the nerdy guy, who is so nerdy and scared and stereotypically a scaredy cat that he goes into a room with one of the villains and immediately turns and runs away and can't help you at all. However, because he's your stereotypical 80s nerd, he has a background in engineering, and you can send him to fix like half the building if you need to. And so you can get to other parts of the game simply by getting it all repaired. All right, Bernard, I need you in the basement. Trust me. Or in the crawl space. Trust me. I need you to fix like 3 pipes in here. You're good. Meanwhile, you could also take Wendy, who's an interesting character, who's an aspiring journalist in college. However, what you can do is expose the secret plans by printing them out and typing it out into a manuscript and sending it over to a guy who will publish literally anything.
We all know the type.
My personal favorite is their phone number is actually the LucasArts Games hotline. So if you actually called it, you would get the hint hotline to talk about hints back, because that was the thing you did back in the day. But yeah, there's all these things for it. So what we bump into here is a difference in game design philosophy. LucasArts versus Sierra is probably the two biggest extremes on this. Sierra, when they make a point-click adventure game, wants to punish you for trying out anything if you don't follow you're not trying to get through the storyline the way it's meant to be. LucasArts games, on the other hand, had a way to beat the game if you screwed up. So, back in Maniac Mansion, the reason why there was all these extra endings was in the event that you picked a certain character combination that you couldn't figure out how to beat the game. There is also still the regular way to beat the game. So, brief notice on this: the plot of Maniac Mansion is that there's a meteor who's sentient and is taking over the brain of the mad scientist in Maniac Mansion. Don't worry about it. He was crazy to begin with. This just the whole being possessed by a evil meteor.
Conveniently only tangentially related.
Yeah, just over to the side. The guy built a nuclear reactor in his basement, but is cooled off by the pool. Also, you can't go in the pool because of that. However, one of the ways to end yourself is to drink the water from the pool. Don't do that.
If I might interject here for a moment, there's actually a very tangible reason for the differences in these two philosophies. There is a concept in game design called combinatorial explosion, which basically means the more things you put into a game, the more they have to interact with each other. So
Right.
say I'm making an adventure game, and I'm making a puzzle where you need to light a lamp. So I give the player a lighter so that they can light it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fine. But now I've given the player an item that creates fire. So inevitably, the player is going to try to use it on other things. Now, I could simply say that the lighter only works on the one item I intend. If at some point the player wants to burn a rope or burn if they're a detective and they want to burn incriminating evidence, I need to give a reason why that doesn't work, or the player feels cheated that they can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need to create a way for all these items to interact not only with other items but with the environment itself. So there's both pros and cons to both limiting the amount of things a player can do with an item to expand the amount of ways to solve a problem, and to allowing them to experiment and see what can be done.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of it, the way I think I best heard it described was, you don't have to solve the puzzle a logical way. You have to solve the puzzle a way that the creator thinks is a logical way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that ultimately comes down to, when you look at different creators, you're going to have very different philosophies on how exactly you are interacting with these games, because they have different experiences on how they're interacting with these games, or on what kind of things they want to do. And that's why you see LucasArts, especially once it starts getting into its more comedic era and starts really hitting its stride, almost anything is a solution to anything, because, there's something funny that could come of that. Whereas
True.
with Sierra games, it's very much so yes, we have an intended path for you. We have a story we want to tell, because that's how, the old text-based adventure games used to work.
It was literally like a book that you would read. So the book would have start, middle, and end. It doesn't expect you to try out other things, but then you lock yourself out for it. So, however, this game engine is so prevalent because that almost everyone adopts it when the adventure game gets into its heyday.
It's so ubiquitous. One of LucasArts' main creatives, when asked for a documentary, it's a short YouTube video about the history of the genre, he's like, "Can you describe it in one word?" And his response was scummy. Because it's a wordplay on the Scum engine.
Oh yeah, but so this is where things the games try to play with it and gets kind of nasty. When I was Leisure Suit Larry, which is a parody game on it, and as adult themed as it is, some of the puzzles in that thing were the nastiest I've been to. There is a janitor you have to talk to, but in order to talk to them, you have to manually type in a command for that janitor's name. But it looks like it was spelled with 15 different letters, and a cat walked over to the keyboard. But you have to sort of almost guess it or figure out where it is. There was a puzzle in there where you needed shaved dice, and I didn't realize that I needed to take a razor blade and actually shave these dice down. because that's a pun. But yeah, so this is where we get into the heyday, because after the Scum engine, all bets are off. People now have an engine that they know how it works, and everyone's either has a replica of it or has it. And by everyone, I mean almost anybody who's building an adventure game in this genre. And they just have them all over the place. About the mid to I want to say late 80s to almost the mid to late 90s is the heyday, the golden age of the point click adventure game. So at this point in time, they can talk about some of the classics or the best ones that are out there for it. Like, I got into point click adventure games. My first one I actually got to play was Sam and Max Hit the Road. And I'm proud to say,
excellent start.
That is a super fun one, and I beat it. And I can rarely, and I can't say this all the time, but I could beat it without needing to have a wiki. Okay, truth be told, point-and-click adventure games is the one genre I'm like, hey, I got that wiki on standby. I'm currently going through Baldur's Gate 3 trying to avoid any kind of spoilers and things for myself with a wiki. The other day, I was going to play a point-and-click adventure game. Oh no, that wiki is right up. I am finding out the instructions because I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, I've hit the same point where I'm like, there's so many games where it's like, if I'm playing it, I have my browser open in another tab with like a million guides to it. Like, I started replaying Elden Ring because I never finished it the first time I started playing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, dude, I know how Souls games are. I opened up a list with like every NPC interaction in the game, and I'm like, just so I know where the quest lines are.
But it's not as, how do I want to put this? It's not as bad as a point-click adventure game.
Oh, no. Yeah, no. A point-and-click adventure game, if you don't have a guide open, good luck. The biggest example I can think of that was I replayed Fate of Atlantis for the first time in like a year or two ago, and I couldn't even get out of the intro without pulling up a guide. I was like, how do I get through this intro again? Because I'm just like moving my mouse around, not seeing anything to interact with. Turns out the first time it was because my game had glitched.
Oh, you know that.
So then I rebooted the game and I started looking around again, and I'm like, I still don't know what I'm doing here.
Okay.
I had to pull up a guide just to get out of the intro, and I'm like, oh boy, this is not a good look.
This is rough. And this isn't like, probably the most famous game that had something like that was Driver. Driver, there is a list of there is tons and tons of people who haven't gotten out of the tutorial because they've been stuck in that tutorial. So it's also weird that LucasArts at this point, like, this is the heyday of the Indiana Jones game chronicles, because you have Fate of Atlantis, Tower, the Emperor's Tomb, and like a stockpile of Indiana Jones games for it, and like 3 of them are point-click adventure games.
Yeah.
I do love that one on the basis of it's one of the few games out there that has a hidden difficulty mode if you know what you're doing. So in Fate of Atlantis, when you get to after you get through I'd say the intro part of the game, you go into the person who's helping you out, it gives the seance to you, and it's like trying to read your spirit, and you as Indiana Jones can just answer whatever questions that you want to. However, one of the questions that you can, there's a question in there that asks you, how are you going to deal with this spiritual case? So you can answer it with, I like to use my mind to deal with my problems, or I can just take it on with my fists, or I can, I actually just need a partner for that. What you don't know at the time is you're deciding how the next sections of the game is going to be played. If you pick the choice of being an intellectual, you are going through the game with the most difficult puzzles that are out there. Like, I think there's like a puzzle that you have to figure out a map and a discus, and you have to know pi to solve a mathematical problem to get to this point. If you pick the fists option, which is the easiest option, there's a bunch of random encounters. Luckily, if you have a 10 key, one of the buttons is sucker punch the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sucker punching my way across Egypt on this one. But it's also, there's the least amount of puzzles on there, or they're the easiest puzzles to deal with. If you pick the middle path, the partner, these are the middle ground puzzles, but you also have 2 characters that you can play as, so you have to figure out which puzzles are working with which character on that. Sophia Hopgood, that's the name of that character.
Yeah.
Which is just an interesting way to play that. In fact, there's a bunch of weird point-click adventure games that start popping up. There's one I bumped into that I've been meaning to play, but I haven't. So join me on this ride of trying to explain this. Imagine you are a superhero team, but your powers are like the X-Men, but not very good or useful. And you are,
So
by
like
the
the
way,
X-Men.
depends on the X-Men. Trust me, Wolverine's power set, amazing. I think there's one guy named Glow or like it's the guy whose powers is that you can see through my skin, and that's about it.
Yeah. Or soft serve, which we're not going to get into.
Nope. That's a weird one.
There are a lot of X-Men you just don't get into. But you've got the main lineup, which are like gods amongst men, and then you've got everybody else. This is the game about everybody else.
Now remember,
Gold Balls did stuff. Remember Gold Balls, everybody? No?
Where's my beak game?
If they made like a Bubble Bobble that was a Gold Balls themed Marvel game, I would 100% play it. Just
that
for the
would be
record.
extremely funny.
But it's called it. Oh, also it's post-apocalyptic. Why not? Let's throw that in there. Also, it's basically ran as a tabletop as an RPG. Also, it's a point-click adventure game. So if you're wandering around, you can get EXP and level up by fighting on this RPG side, or go do the point-click adventure game and actually get through the story. It's called the Superhero League of Hoboken. Also, you're in New Jersey.
Oh.
Hoboken, New Jersey, I assume.
Yeah.
Wow. So these people just have nothing going for them.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's... I think that automatically takes the cake as the hardest point-and-click game in general. just by sheer fact of taking place in New Jersey. Because on top of everything else, you have to deal with the crippling issue of living in New Jersey.
I definitely feel like our fans in New Jersey can agree that New Jersey is hard mode in the United States. That's just
what New Jersey is.
I live in Florida. I don't have a place to talk about a lot of states. New Jersey is one I absolutely have every right to dish on.
Yeah, you know it's wild when even Florida's like, oh, for real? Whoa, okay.
But yeah, so like there's weird mix and matches on that. Some of them that's a questionable one, but you got it. But yeah, so my first interlude was Sam and Max Hit the Road, and then I did after that was probably Day of the Tentacle, which is a sequel to Maniac Mansion, and which is weird for my gaming side because I went backwards and started playing older and older ones, and it just got harder and harder, and to a point where like I can't find a wiki on this one. But
just figure it out.
That's the worst thing about going back to like really old retro games. It's like, oh wow, yeah, this was before the internet was a big thing, so people didn't write guides for this.
All right. What about
every once in a while, you'd find some guy who wrote an ASCII guide for it in like 2004, and I'm like, why were you doing this? Did you have nothing else going on in your life, or were you destined to take this path?
Shout out to all the warriors on Game FAQs. You have saved me countless hours, whoever you are.
So true.
Unsung heroes.
Yeah.
Now, as far as that debate between like hard mode and or between the differences of philosophy of being able to beat the game and not or making it hard for it, point-click adventure games are just known for by their designers to be they're just mean. They don't just want to punish their characters. Sometimes they just fail on it. One of the worst ones I bumped into as I was playing through the Dig, So the Dig is a game where you're playing as an astronaut who's stuck on another planet and you have to navigate yourself around. They have a very, very nasty puzzle in there. Like, what you have to do is you have to, and this might seem weird, but you have to, there's a sea creature monster that's blocking your path. But to do with the sea creature monster is that you have to destroy it. What you don't know is that you have to take you have crystals called life crystals, which lets you resurrect the dead. Okay. So what you need to do is you need to assemble, you have the bones of a recently killed turtle-like creature on this alien planet. And and you have a fossil of that same creature. So you have to take these bones, assemble them puzzle style, and hope you got them in the right spot, and then use the crystals to bring it back to life. Okay. So It took me half an hour and a bunch of times. If it doesn't work, it just the crystals do nothing. If you run out of crystals, you got to go back to the crystal layer, grab the crystals, make it back here, take a detour back here, and start the puzzle all over again. Got it assembled, put it in there, sent the creature out. It gets eaten by the sea monster, and later spit out. I'm like, yep. I don't get it. What was I supposed to do with this? Later, I found out I was supposed to put a bomb in the creature, so that way it ate the bomb. So I had to reassemble this guy a second or third time on this.
Oh, that just reminds me of the Rancor on Terrace and KOTOR.
Mm-hmm.
Having to realize you have to reverse pickpocket bombs into it.
If you go to the TV Tropes page for the article of that one puzzle, the page image is the fossil puzzle from the dig.
I think the dig was also pretty notoriously known for being like super hard compared to a lot of LucasArts games, wasn't it?
The dig is a fantastic game with a fascinating story that I never want to play again.
No joke. Like the story is amazing. Like it's deep and very well thought out, and there's a lot of philosophy in there too. It is a difficult game to get through. So like that is one of two. I thought my game glitched horribly. There's nowhere to. So there's a bridge or this console that you bump into that has a hexagon that you can click, and it turns into a 3D hexagonal shape, like a dodecahedron. I think it is what to call that, and it's like that. A 12-sided die. I'm trying to remember what.
Yeah, I think that's right.
All right. So what you're supposed to do, and it's not written anywhere, is you have to click on it and hold the button down so it can have time to make a light bridge for you, because you need that at the end of the game. I didn't do that. I beat all the puzzles here, did not do that. But if you want the most notorious point-click adventure game that is on miles ahead of everybody else, it's Myst. Myst is nasty.
I hated Myst as a kid. Oh my god, I hated it. I still kind of do.
There's that little lingering resentment there of like, oh, come on, you were not worth what I went through for you.
Well, and especially because, I mean, as a child, you don't really, I didn't understand really the point of the game. So I like wandered around, clicked some buttons, wandered around, did nothing, looked out off the observation deck, wandered around, and was like, guess that's the game. Cool.
Yeah, it's so weird. I feel like Myst is like the one game that everybody has like this like universal experience of discovering it way too young.
Yeah, 100%.
It's like, what the heck am I supposed to do in Myst? I'm 8 years old.
Yeah, I had no idea.
I don't know if you guys did what I did, which is accidentally get to the end of Myst.
I didn't know there was.
Accidentally is a very funny word there.
There's a way to trip, fall, and get to the end of the game.
Did not know there was an end of Myst.
Neither.
I don't believe I did, no.
Yeah. Let me tell you, I didn't know that either. I didn't realize that I soft locked myself because there was a bunch of puzzles I was supposed to do, and I couldn't figure out how to get up back to where I started.
Insane.
Because I tripped, fell, accidentally got to the end of the game. And there's like people who are trapped in books, but also books have their own worlds and their own puzzles.
Oh, Myst. Why were you the way that you are?
No one knows. Who hurt the creators? That's what I want to know.
Like the big cool thing about it, it was made by two guys, but who hurt them?
We need to know.
Myst was nasty. Actually, so there.
What text adventure game killed your parents?
Probably Zorg, the one that ate it with the Gru.
They were eaten by a Gru, yeah. I was just gonna say.
That makes so much sense. It all comes full circle, folks.
So with that, like honestly, Maniac Mansion is probably my most influential. Grim Fandango made awards when that came out, and it was personally, I unfortunately didn't get to play it in its heyday. I got to play it way later in life, but it was super amazing because they have how do I want to say this? Their art style is very much in the way of Mesoamerican art of that whole Day of the Dead aesthetic. And there's actually the guys who did this did their research for it, because the whole point of the game is that the main character, Axa, is a travel agent basically. So a person recently dies, they come to the underworld. He's the guy who has to, based upon how their souls are or how they did in life, figure out where they're supposed to go through the underworld. However, if a person does really well or is very much a very good person, they can take a train and fast track and skip the years and years of torment that you're supposed to get through this. or they would have to go through it the slow way and actually just walk. And so it's kind of comical because what happens is that depending on how you did it, how you did in life, you might get a quick train to take number 9 train straight to the end. Ooh, looks like you didn't do very well in life. In fact, you were firing a dick. Here's a walking stick and a compass that might work. Enjoy.
No other game that we talk about in this episode, make it Grim Fandango.
Oh yeah, Grim Fandango, I think. If you just want to dip your toes in and understand where the genre got all the love and attention that it still garners today, Grim Fandango is the game to do it.
Yeah.
There are a lot of games that I personally would be like, well, I would almost rather somebody play this over it. But honestly, I'm with Tim on this one. If you had to pick one game of any point-and-click adventure game to play to understand the genre, Grim Fandango is the choice by a mile.
I will say it's not the easiest of them. Honestly, I would go with Day of the Tentacle. Even though it's a sequel to Maniac Mansion, you don't need to have played Maniac Mansion for it.
No.
But that is a much easier time to go through on point-and-click adventure games. But Grim Fandango...
No, you have to learn to struggle. It took me 3 resets to finish Grim Fandango, and I loved it.
Every time. I loved it. Oh, man.
You're going to learn what these games are about by hook or by crook, gosh darn it.
Oh, yeah, but no, Grim Fandango is amazing. Full Throttle is one of the bigger ones too, but I never got a chance to. It's on my list of games to play. I just never got a chance to play it yet. But this is like the early to mid '90s, and this is the heyday of the point-click adventure game genre. So much so, there is Easter eggs for other games in the point-click adventure game for it. If you've ever played the first Monkey Island game, which by the way, Monkey Island games are hilarious. They're just a fun ride.
If you want to go deeper than Grim Fandango, please play Monkey Island. At least the first one.
At least the first.
That's the game that, like, emotionally, I want to say play that above if nothing else. But no, it has to be Grim Fandango.
Mm-hmm.
Grim Fandango is just too strong of a sample of the genre.
Oh, very much so. But in it, there's a pirate that you can talk to, which is a guy sitting in the corner, and he has a pin that you can that reads asking you about Loom, which is another point-click adventure game.
Loom, I think it came out the same year that Monkey Island did. It's literally just cross-promoting the other LucasArts point-and-click game.
There is in Maniac Mansion there is a chainsaw you can get your hands on, but whenever you get it, it says if you ever try to use it and anything, it says the gas you have no gas. The gas is in another game. The gas is in another game. There's this other game out there. I wish I could remember its name, but in it you find a gas can and it says, "Man, this would be useful if I had a chainsaw for this, but I don't really have anything I could use this gas can for." Just things like that are amazing. Sam & Max is a fun series, and that's how it got me into Sam & Max in general, is just the game. Which Sam & Max will be notorious for the point-click adventure games genre on this. The weirdest case on this is that there's so many children's-based point-click adventures games that started coming out around this time. Freddy
and
Fish.
This is how so many people got started with this. Oh wow, Tim!
Yeah, I heard it. Knuckles crack.
He's been saving up for that one.
Okay, so I am so biased with what I'm about to say here. Literally, the first video game I can ever remember playing is Pajama Sam and No Need to Hide When It's Dark Outside. So when I say that humongous entertainment games are my childhood, this is literally as far back as I can go.
He is so emotionally connected to them that when we started testing out the ability to record people's screens on Riverside, it was me watching him play Pajama Sam.
I love that. Oh, man. But yeah, that is deep to the core for you.
Yeah, and Humongous Entertainment was a new company founded by Ron Gilbert after he left LucasArts. So they're all scum-based games and incredibly easy for kids to get in, but just so so imaginative and memorable. Like, they are not at all hard. I have seen people that know what they're doing. they can speedrun these games in less than 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's
But and I'm sure that if the audience listening to this has never played one before and they try to get into it and like, I mean, this is pretty good for a kids game. I don't see what the big deal is. I admit that it's for a gateway drug into the adventure genre for a young kid in the late 90s. This was literally, you could not do any better.
That's where I got the start. That's where I got the hook.
They hooked me on the Blues Clues games, man, and now I own 5 copies of Grim Fandango.
I get you.
If I had a nickel for every time I bought, Fallout 2 because I got super hooked to the genre, I would have about $1.50. It doesn't seem like a lot. That it's not a whole lot of money, but I still did it a lot. And I'm not going to ask Dan about Final Fantasy VII.
No comment.
They get that away in cereal boxes now.
Oh God, I've bought so many copies of that game, and I don't regret it at all. I mean,
I'll do it again.
We're in double digits easily.
It reminds me of I saw it on sale on Switch, and I went, "Ooh, is this the remake?" And I went, "No, it's the original." And I went, "Is that going to stop me from buying it again?"
But,
no,
but I could do it
No,
again,
it
though,
isn't.
right?
I've had it on my phone. I've had it on PSP, PlayStation 3, 2, 1, 4. I think I've got it on 5, PC, PC from Square Enix, PC on Steam. I fucking love that game. I will do it again.
It's comfort food. It's just a game you always want access.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
One of the things I gotta let digress on here is because this is the genre that brings voice acting to video games in general first, which makes sense because they're played as a straight story, so it's easy. So you don't have to have a large. You don't have to have a big list of voice acting cues. So anyone who's done voice acting for a video game, and they'll tell you the voice acting script. Bruce Campbell famously said the voice acting script I need for a cartoon is like 4 or 5, maybe 10, 20 pages. The voice acting script I need for a video game, especially, is something like almost a novel of voice acting of a script for that, because there's so many different things that you can put in there.
Yeah, and this is Bruce Campbell talking, who infamously has special dialogue lines if you die after skipping a tutorial, he narrates.
Yep.
I was thinking about that dialogue earlier today, actually, so it's very convenient you bring up Bruce Campbell mentioning voice acting.
But I actually wanted to bring up Bruce Campbell, ironically, because one of the biggest things that hits this genre pretty hard is horror titles and horror games. Like some of the more famous ones out there, Phasmogoria.
Phantasmagoria.
Yeah, Phasmogoria. Phantasmagoria. There is Frankenstein is another one. Tim Curry plays on that.
I was
Then
going
they
to say
have
Phasmophobia, but that's a different game.
Yeah, I was thinking
A better game, notably.
Oh, that is hot take depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah, that's an oddly divisive take.
I have no math. That is an
rough.
incredibly great horror game.
Yeah,
I knew going into it that was going to be intense because the story is very intense, but holy crap, that game. If you've read the short story, play the game, partially because you'll be doing yourself a favor of seeing how he expanded on it, but also because it kind of blows the story out of the water.
Yeah, it's weird to say it, but honestly, yes, that is actually because it's written by the same guy. The script for the game and the design for the game is actually written by the same person who wrote the book. I have no mouth and or the whole story. I have no mouth and I must scream. Super intense. So if you want a point-click adventure game that you should not start with, this is probably it. This is it deals with so many rough topics. It is all kinds of intensity.
I don't even know if it's a game you should finish with. You should play it somewhere in the middle, and then you need a palate cleanser afterwards.
Yeah, you have time to come down off of it. Yeah. I kind of want to say this partially just for the meme, but I do also kind of mean it, and I'll elaborate. It is only partially ironically the Dark Souls of point-and-click adventure games.
I get that.
Not only is it brutally hard, it's incredibly dark, and on more than a few occasions, you're supposed to fail.
Mm-hmm.
the point of, and it is a game that has multiple endings, if I remember correctly. The
It
point of it
does.
is that you are really struggling against everything else the game has to throw at you to get any semblance of anything good to come out of it.
There's some other ones, like there's one I bumped into, Harvest, which is, I'm playing through that right now with regular cast member Zombie Hand, and it is we haven't even gotten to any of the, it is one of the most brutal or violent video games that exist, is Harvest.
I've actually never heard of this one.
It came out very towards the end, about 94, 95, something to that extent.
Yeah,
but
I
it got
see it right
buried
now,
on that.
96.
Yeah. And
The Order of the Harvest Moon. I sure hope that doesn't cause any confusion.
No, imagine getting these two, that and Harvest Moon, confused together. That is terrible. But no, it also is very, very intense, and the atmosphere in that thing just feels like you're in a David Lynch movie. So it is, everything is creepy and off, and I haven't gone very far in that game. But you start off with a guy with amnesia and doesn't know why he's in 1958 of this town, and everyone's obsessed with going into the lodge. The population's only 51 people. Why do they have a lodge? There's not even enough people for this lodge. But yeah, there's a bunch of creepy stuff that's going on with that one. So yeah, there is just this stockpile of horror games on the point-click adventure game, and I did not see that coming into this genre, but there you are. There's some games in there that are, but that's just sort of the case for this, which is weird. But narratively thinking, it's a good way to go.
But if you're interested in this kind of thing, I highly recommend the YouTube channel Conversations with Curtis. It's run by an actor named Paul Morgan Settler, who he played the main character in Phantasmagoria 2. And so what he's been doing over like the past 2 or 3 years is he's been talking to designers of adventure games from this era, getting all the backstory sort of this stuff. Really great stuff. I absolutely recommend checking it out if you're at all interested in this kind of thing.
But yeah, to kind of get into what you're saying about horror taking place in the genre, especially mentioning that right after Humongous, I feel like this is kind of the beauty of having something as open as a point-and-click adventure game. Because adventure has always been a very broad topic, and if you filter by adventure on any game store ever, you're going to get like half the games they have.
Yeah.
And like Tim said, the first game he actively remembers playing is Pajama Sam. I remember playing the Jumpstart Academy games all the time when I was a kid. I feel like if you grew up in the era that we did, like point-and-click games are ingrained in there somewhere, in some space of the being. And I think that comes down to a lot of the fact that I'm not going to say they grew with you, because a lot of the games kind of, I don't want to say got more family friendly over time, but a lot of the content existed before the family friendly stuff started rolling out.
Yeah.
But it's a genre that you had more reasons to interface with over time. And that's something that I especially realized as I was growing up, because I went from playing these edutainment games to going into games more like Monkey Island, like King's Quest, and then slowly evolving into like Grim Fandango, here's Phantasmagoria, and slowly developing down the line of genres.
Very much so. And some of them are comedy, some of them are tragedy. I forgot about Seventh Guest. That was a huge game back in the day, too. Now, one of the other big things that were coming around this time is FMVs, or full motion videos. The amount of, well, let's take a regular actor and we'll just film do things. And that's why we're doing this now. And now we have a game.
You can make a whole episode just devoted to FMV.
Yeah, no, that would be a future topic for that one. But for the purpose of point-and-click adventure games, there's one that I bumped into on my curiosity about how weird this is. Christopher Lloyd is the main character of a point-and-click adventure game. That's how I'm like, that's how this starts? I'm in.
If you will allow me.
Yes.
This guy is unfucking believable.
He warned me about that ahead of time.
And that is my impression of Christopher Walken and Ripper.
No,
that's a really fun notification to get when you're just sitting there like doing something and you see your phone suddenly pop up with notifications. Remind me, I need to work on my Christopher Walken and Ripper impression. I'm like, what is he doing? What am I missing right now?
I know Christopher Walken is in a point-click adventure game, but I don't remember which is. No, what I was talking about is Christopher Lloyd. He plays Doc Brown.
I actually he did one too.
Yeah. So it was a game called Toonstruck, and it's very much in the vein of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And so with that, in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, because they filmed Christopher Lloyd doing all these things, and he plays as an animator who is tracked by his own creation into his own world, and he has to try to figure out how to get out of this cartoon where everything is just zany and wacky and such.
I totally forgot about this one.
And this is not the only FMV. Like the game I was telling you about earlier, Frankenstein, which is a play on the book Frankenstein. But Tim Curry is himself hamming it up in that video. But yeah, so there's a ton of like first person FMV based. I think Phantasmagoria also is FMV based.
Yeah, it used a lot of live action.
Yeah, Phantasmagoria was FMV.
And so like, yeah, they would just videotape all these things and try to compile them together into a thing, and now we have that game going on for it.
And since we mentioned Phantasmagoria earlier, I will stop leaving everybody in suspense about me quietly dragging it a little while ago. I do like Phantasmagoria. I just think it's overhyped. I think it deserves to be told it's overhyped every now and again. I remember going into that expecting it to be one of the best point-and-click games, and I'm like, well, it's good, but it's no Grim Fandango.
Yeah, take down the tramp. I think that sort of brings us around to a good portion of where we're at for this. So here's where we get into the mid to late 90s. FMV, Clock Tower is also another horror game that I forgot that's point and click, which is weird because that was point and click on the Super Nintendo when that was first there. And then again, when they made another Clock Tower for the PlayStation. So there are point click adventure games on consoles. They're just fewer and far between. Famous one is Deja Vu for the NES, which is you play as a detective who has basically gotten amnesia and has already solved the case that they forgot that they solved. And you have to go retrace your own steps by exploring through that, which is really interesting. There's also one of the Monkey Island games came out for the PlayStation 2, Escape from Monkey Island. That one was on the PS2. By the way, give credit where credit's due. The same voice actor has been playing Guybrush Threepwood since the beginning.
Oh yeah, nothing but respect.
He knows what he's about. Oh, so if you want one of the most weirdest rug pull stories about in the point click adventure genre, you have to go with Monkey Island. Monkey Island was written originally, I think it's a Tim Schafer project.
Ron Gilbert.
No, Ron Gilbert. Yeah, Ron Gilbert. And Ron Gilbert's famous in the point-click adventure games because he makes a lot of comedy-based point-click adventure games. He worked on Maniac Mansion, got his hype for various other ones. His biggest one is the Monkey Island series, but he moves on for other games. So here's what happens. Monkey Island 1 you go through the game and you play through it and you get to the end of it. You go into Monkey Island 2. In Monkey Island 2, at the end of the game, you end up in a carnival, in a theme park, where you're a child. That's also Guybrush Threepwood, but also a child, and being chased around by his nephew Chucky, and it becomes this weird thing. And his eyes turn around and they glow, and that's one of the last scenes that you see. And he's possessed. And then you know what happens? Ron Gilbert leaves the project entirely. He just leaves LucasArts, but he leaves it with that game with such a big killing. But he leaves after he was already being supposed to make Monkey Island 3, and so they already started production with Monkey Island 3. And he's like, "I'm out, it's peace." And so nobody knows what the story actually is supposed to be. So Monkey Island 3 starts with a weird retcon of the whole thing. My personal favorite is you're on. And Guybrush Threepwood is just going out there. Yeah, I kind of escaped the island, I guess. And then there's a bunch of like wreckage from the island coming at just falling behind him, and we just sort of move on with that. Now, the reason why I bring this up is the latest Monkey Island game that came out, like just I want to say 2020 or 2019, just very recently, Ron Gilbert did work on that one.
2022, I think.
Oh yeah, it was very new. Yeah, 2022. Ron Gilbert also came on to work on that project, essentially and all huge fans of Monkey Island like, okay, we got to figure out what's happening with that weird ending to Monkey Island 2, and they just sort of gloss over it weirdly.
I think the thing I respect most about him coming back for Return to Monkey Island is the fact that he still managed to go, okay, but no, all the games that happened while I wasn't there, those still count.
Yeah, those are solid.
I can still work with those. It almost reminds me of when we got Crash 4. And Crash 4 went, oh yeah, all the games between 3 and now are non-canon, they didn't exist, don't mention them, don't think about it. And I'm kind of like, okay, come on, but some of those were good. Some of them, not all of them, some of them. And that's why I kind of look at like the commitment of Monkey Island going, yeah, okay, all of them are canon, sure, why not? I'm like, okay, cool. I always kind of appreciate when they're willing to do that. God knows Twisted Metal didn't, but who cares about Twisted Metal in 2024?
Lord knows Twisted Metal did not do that.
I am the last person who cares about Twisted Metal in 2024, I promise you.
I've got some nostalgia for it. I appreciate what it is and what it did for us.
But yeah, another weird one is how many like big properties become a point-click adventure game. Star Trek. That's how they did the original for the 25th anniversary, way back in the 80s, or in the late 80s, early 90s. They were going to. It was announced that they were going to make a game based upon the original Star Trek lore from the Star Trek the original series. And so with that, they turned it into a point-click adventure game, where when you're on an away mission, you have to choose who you want on that away mission with you. And that's what helps you determine on there. So if you want the easiest way, always take Spock with you, the smart guy. Side note, Star Trek The Next Generation also has a point-click and adventure game. And I cheap that out by always taking Data with me because he's a robot and it doesn't have a lot of the humanoids problems. Like, you know, this atmosphere is toxic. I'll send Data to do this. And my solution was send Data to do pretty much everything.
And yet, ironically, LucasArts never made a Star Wars text adventure, a point and click.
Right? Yeah, that always did kind of confuse me. I was like, come on, like every IP got one. Like so many licensed point and click games. And so many that were supposed to happen and didn't, which we can get into in a minute. But somehow, LucasArts, the kings of the genre, never made one of their biggest franchises into a point and click game.
Shame. It is all right there for you. I want you to know that, you know, other things happen to have a point-click adventure games out there. Spider-Man has a point-click adventure game. It's not good, but it exists.
The Blair Witch Project has one that honestly is pretty good. It definitely a lot better than the movie.
Really? There's a Blair Witch Project point and click game?
Yeah.
I need to go find this now. Holy crap.
Warcraft has one that's basically just one of their novels.
Yeah.
Oh my god,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh god.
Okay.
Tim and I knew the second we mentioned being on a point and click episode that this was going to become a thing we talked about.
So Warcraft Adventures, well, this is actually a good transition into the next point of the talk. This came out, well, it was going to come out right at the tail end of the golden age of point and clicks. So this was going to be a fully animated, by the way, by the studio that made the Zelda CDI games, so you know we're in good hands.
Yeah, we were on a strong start there.
Hooray!
And so it was going to be the story of how Thrall escaped his imprisonment and became the leader of the Horde. When the game was like 90% done, like everything that had been programmed, they were basically just filling it in with some dialogue that hadn't been programmed yet. The game was canceled.
You just shut down?
Yeah.
Yeah, just canceled. Never saw the light of day for the better part of 20 years until like some Russian hackers found a complete like the last build and leaked it online. So if you want, you can go and play this game right now. And if you're a Warcraft fan, it is a trip to play this thing.
Oh, it's so wild. I almost wish it had come out just because of how weird it is, but I kind of appreciate it more now for knowing that this was what was supposed to happen, but it's what didn't happen.
Give Deathwing a hookah.
Definitely one of the games of all times.
Yeah,
It definitely is a game.
it really is.
Absolutely, it is.
I was explaining that because one of my IRL friends, I got into Warcraft very recently. Like, he played some of the games, he had a little bit of experience, but he didn't know too much about what was going on. So we went back and played the RTS games, and he got to the point in 2 where Neltharion shows up and goes, "Hey, why is he on Outland?" I went, "Don't worry about that, because early lore gets really weird, and this just makes it so much weirder. Because he's on 2 different planets at around the same time, and also he's here, and he's smoking a hookah, and don't really question it too much, because you will start losing your mind."
It's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It's all good,
It's
right?
fine.
Like, I kind of wish it came out, if only for the fact that this would have retconned what Deathwing was actually doing, to be sitting in a random tower smoking a hookah until Thrall ran into him.
Just hanging
And
out.
honestly, that's kind of peak.
Mm-hmm.
I have worse vacations.
Ace Ventura's cartoon series had a point-click adventure game of all things.
Oh no.
Back in the day, Ace Ventura and The Mask both had a cartoon series that was made. And then with that, Ace Ventura was slightly more popular and managed to get licensed to be a point-click adventure game. Fun fact, the voice actor for both Stanley Ipkiss and Ace Ventura is, I think, the same guy, Rob Paulson. So yeah, that is a thing that happened. But yeah, when I say like a lot of people had a point-click adventure game, a lot of people had a point-click adventure game. So one of the and this is sort of next, we got the downfall of the point-click adventure game. About 96, 97, ironically, when Final Fantasy starts coming around, because that is one of the things that killed it off. One of the things that happens is that a point-click adventure game is very, very story-driven. However, it also doesn't have a lot of places of growth. You move around the story, once you beat it, there's not a whole lot of, very few, I think, actually has a good replay value on that. And it's not like an RPG where you can start building yourself with better stats or explore for things that are not in the game, like the weapon system in Final Fantasy VII. Because I don't think that was in the game originally for Final Fantasy VII, right?
The weapon system?
Like the weapon monsters that you can go fight to get the better the gear for that one. I don't remember if that was in its original build. I think it was a translation thing. But the point being is that you could do these extra things that are on top of the story that you have, on top of the game. Yeah, Super Mario RPG, for example, there's a whole side quest to take on a boss from one of the Final Fantasy games, if you can find it. But that's if you can find it. In a point-click adventure game, it's very story-driven. You are here to finish this whole novel. You are here for this story. And so point-click adventure games, because they're so limiting for what it needs to do, or I digress. It's limited on what you need for the story, so you don't need to expand your scope beyond that.
Yeah, you've already kind of experienced all the mechanics that the genre can throw at you if you've played one of the games on a given
If
engine.
you played one, it's almost like the old saying of you've done one, you've done them all. But that's not exactly. There's a bunch of ones that are big and out there for it, like Grim Fandango. But Grim Fandango took years to build. There's lots of companies who did not take that time, and because you don't have to deal with this back mechanical stuff as very often, you could set up in your game to isolate your character for it. So back to that key example, you've missed it, you can't go back. We never have to go back, so I never have to worry about these assets ever again.
To answer your question earlier, original Japanese release Ruby and Emerald Weapon weren't in the game. Diamond is in the game, but I don't think they're fightable for 7.
Yes, okay. But yeah, point-click adventure games have just ended up both at this time flooding the market, and there wasn't a whole desire for that one. Final Fantasy VII just needs its own episode on basically how it revolutionized the genre on this.
I'd hate that.
Oh yeah, you'd hate that
I
so
hate
much.
Final Fantasy VII. I don't know if I've told you that before.
Mhm.
Terrible.
but with its visuals, your FMVs, like there's great, glorious filmed visuals in there, which were unfortunately for the give or take better quality than the ones that we see for point-click adventure games. And point-click adventure games could be made with a very small team and then spit out for it. Unless you had one of the bigger writers who understood the genre and how to explore it, you didn't really need them for it. And that's sort of where we get into this crash of point-click adventure games, because the market basically was both saturated and died out for it. And it wasn't the latest, biggest thing that was coming out. RPGs were.
Yeah. It was just the unfortunate side effect of a good thing can only last so long. You got a good decade out of it, and now as more genres are starting to advance onto greater technology, manage to find more ways to innovate, more ways to grow, more things to do, it eventually just came down to, like basically the position a lot of people are in today of, games are not necessarily cheap. They are all a very time-consuming hobby. You kind of have to pick and choose, like, which one is going to give me the most bang for my buck. And for a lot of people, after all the fun they've had with point-and-click adventure games, it ultimately kind of looked like, well, I'd rather do the new thing. And the new thing is the fact that, Final Fantasy had been wildly popular before 7, but 7 was all of a sudden this, it took it from being a very popular RPG to being, the biggest game in the world for a time. And it's hard to compete when you're, even when you're Grim Fandango, you can't exactly, go to bat as being the biggest game in the world.
Mm-hmm. And Grim Fandango's got awards and tales and such, but no, it's no Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, Grim Fandango was in the running for several Game of the Year awards when it came out. It's just a matter of, like, ultimately the sales numbers did not match up to that.
And while there's a lot of factors around why the point-and-click adventure hit its end, it's very rare in gaming that you find so many gaming historians agree on a proverbial Franz Ferdinand moment. For point-and-clicks, it's the cat hair puzzle from Gabriel Knight.
There's those who do and those who don't know. Tim, explain for the audience.
Okay, so Gabriel Knight, very quickly, it was a series of Sierra games where he plays a supernatural detective. Great games, a lot of fun. They made some remakes; they're pretty good. But Gabriel Knight 3, this is literally the first puzzle of the game. So your goal is for the main character to disguise himself as another guy so you can rent a moped. To do this, you first have to distract the other guy with a piece of candy, and then steal the passport from his pocket. Then you steal his hat and jacket. Then you draw a mustache on the face of the passport photo with a marker to obscure his face. And then you need to make a fake mustache. You make a fake mustache by you put a bit of masking tape on a hole and provoke a cat into running past it to leave some cat hair on it. Then you use the fur to make. You take the fur that's on the tape, use it to make a fake mustache to glue it to your main character's face with a packet of syrup. And then when all is said and done, when you go to solve the puzzle, he's not wearing the goddamn mustache. The string of logic you need to follow in this puzzle is like going back to the Ryan Vosley saying it just needs to make sense to the developer. I need to know who thought any of this made sense.
Well, conveniently, I found out a little while ago. I don't remember exactly how I found it out. The reason that is in the game is because they didn't have time to cut it. All of the devs decided it didn't make sense either, but they ran out of time to cut it, so they had to leave it in.
Incredible.
That is...
It is the exact opposite of time restraints leading to cut content. They couldn't cut the content because they didn't have time.
Oh my god.
That's so terrible.
It was like, no, we're about to ship. We can't cut that puzzle. And lo and behold, that puzzle became this emblem of every problem people had with the direction point-and-click games had taken.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like Tim said, it's very rare that so many gaming historians can agree on like one defining death. And that was it.
Mm-hmm. The puzzle was just so complicated and so unnecessary and so messy.
Random.
Moon logic, sir.
I do.
The finest of moon logic.
Find it interesting too, because Final Fantasy VII comes out in 97. Ocarina of Time comes out in 98. So, it's kind of hit after hit after hit to this unfortunate genre. And as we've mentioned previously, just to kind of go back to it, like the people were less interested in these obscure, ridiculous, weird puzzles. They were more interested in being the character and doing the action of solving the puzzle, right? Pushing a block onto a switch to open a door, or what have you, and having these, FMVs or these animated cutscenes that you could get in these stronger engine, these RPGs that were coming out. I just find it very interesting that there were a number of big hits back to back, year after year, combined with the flagging interest and questionable puzzle design, shall we say, of the point and click action game that I think really kind of sealed its fate.
Yeah, this isn't the case of timing. This is a case of the bubble bursting, really.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of like when you have a puzzle that hard, that difficult, and it's now gone down in notoriety for it, it's hard to come back from it. But yeah, 97 and 98, huge years. They are hits after hits after hits of some of the biggest games and genre starters of the time. Like when Final Fantasy VII is not the only biggest hit during that year, that's saying something.
Well,
and Final Fantasy VII gets be a hit in like 3 different years after that.
And you had Res Evil in 96. You had, like, the 90s were the hits for a long time, and it makes sense that games that were once loved and thought of well may have had a harder time keeping up because they didn't innovate or change, or if they did, it was not well received.
Now, this sort of gets to the tail end of this. The genre itself doesn't die out. There's one group that ends up trying to push it back into the AAA, trying to push it back on there, and that's Telltale Games. I think their first one is Sam & Max, which was already a proven hit in the point-and-click genre beforehand. And then after that, like the second game that they made was Back to the Future, and you got Christopher, like a lot of the original actors, to reprise their roles for this. There's so many, and Telltale does this thing where their goal is to sort of take IPs that end up being popular or were popular and redeveloping them as a continuation of the story, would you say, of that particular genre as a point-click adventure game. And it was doing well. And if you're wondering how big this was, when they did The Walking Dead, that was almost game of the year for that when that came out. And The Walking Dead is amazing. They kind of retextualized the game to make it actually easier for a person to get into point-click adventuring for it. Like, there's a lot less commands, and they did it serialized. So this introduced sort of when you would buy the game, you would buy the chapter 1 would be the first set of the game that you'd get, and then the second one would be chapter 2, and the second one would be chapter 3. And they actually sold those games at a lower price than the average, much lower price as their base price than the average game. So it made it easier to justify buying the next chapter and the next chapter. If you don't like it, you can just quit at that point, and you're good.
It's amazing the rise and fall of Telltale Games and how they had lightning in a bottle a number of times. The Walking Dead definitely being one of them. Tales from the Borderlands was very well received.
Tales of the Borderlands is excellent.
Oh, it's fantastic. Until it isn't.
Guardians of the Galaxy was severely underrated.
Sure, yeah. The Batman series they did was pretty good. Like,
that was weird. They retold Batman story in a way that was fun.
It's incredible that they succeeded so hard and then died so fast.
I don't quote me on this. I know that the Telltale Games had a bunch of problems, but I think one of their biggest problems was churning out so many IPs at once.
Yeah, I think there was a point in time where simultaneously they were releasing Game of Thrones, Guardians of the Galaxy, and I believe if it had not been already been released, they were already working on the Batman series. So that's 3 5-episode games that you're working on at the same time. That's a lot of work, even for a much larger developer.
Yeah, I think at that time they were actually even deeper than that. Because if I remember
Yes.
correctly, the first half of Batman had just ended. Then they launched into Game of Thrones. Then they went into I think that's when Guardian started. Sometime after Guardian started, they started that Minecraft story mode thing they had going.
Yeah.
And then before any of those ended, they had the second half of Batman starting.
Crazy.
Like they were like, I feel like that's, and I remember this era very clearly because whenever you would open the store page, the first thing you would see is there's like a million Telltale games there.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I was kind of proud to admit that during that time, the only game I played was Tales from the Borderlands, and it's because I got it for free. And I was like, okay, cool, free game.
Oh, that's rough on that one. But yeah, Telltale Games happened to. They had Strong Bad's cool game for cool people, for attractive people. They had a Strong Bad game.
They had 2 games about just playing poker with crossover characters, and they're incredible.
I'm so disappointed Poker Night at the Inventory is technically like lost.
I know it's. I'm still looking at that I have 2. I don't have 1, and it haunts me at night.
I hear that 1 is even harder to find than 2, oddly enough, which is what really hurts because it's like, oh god, why is Telltale is a tragedy. It's like a Greek tragedy, is what it.
It had the genre. It had, if it could manage itself better, we would point-click adventure games. They literally restarted the genre and restarted an interest for it. They had the gold and they just dropped it on that. I still own a bunch of those Telltale games, and they were. I know Jurassic Park was one that was not well received, and I know one of their biggest problems that they had was it was very much they could not afford to take a loss. If one game dropped because of how expensive these IPs are, it would ruin it down the line for itself, and then they just end up almost saturating their own market. It was bad. Tales of Monkey Island was also one of their games, and that was really like their games were good. That was the downside for it. They just made so many of them, and so Telltale is just a sad story with that. But that's sort of the short end of how Telltale works out. They rebuilt the genre and rebuilt the interest. The interest does not go away though. In the modern times that we have right now, we are seeing point-click adventure games being bounced around and made, but mostly on the indie scale, which is kind of where they can shine because you are literally just working within the story itself for it. All right. So you don't need a AAA budget to make a point-click adventure game as long as you can make a very good point-click adventure game. And you can work on these projects with small teams, which is one of its biggest benefits for it. Recently, I played a point-click adventure game. It was a horror game called World of Horror, and it's all the art in it is based on the artist Junji Ito.
Oh wow!
Oh, super creepy, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, his art scares me at night. You ever see, it's a meme that pops around that there's this, it looks like a prostitute from GTA, and he's next to the door, and he leans over towards this car and goes, so, $50, you can do whatever that you want. And the guy in the car goes, can you be in the same room while I play Silent Hill 2? It's scary.
That sounds like something I would end up pulling.
But yeah, so like there are even text-based adventure games made a weird comeback in the indie scene for a little bit.
Well, that's also overlapping with the rise of popularity in visual novels.
Yes, that's the other big thing on that one.
And I think in a lot of cases, Telltale's influence, and I feel like this is something I can tie back to early on. When we talk about text-based adventure games, we talk about it being a catalyst for point-and-click games, but text-based adventure games are like the big bang for the game industry. And I mean that slightly as an exaggeration, but so many genres can trace their roots back to text-based adventure games. It's like how rock and roll basically created like half of popular music nowadays. And if you go back even further, you've got like R&B. It's like you keep going back down these trees and you realize it all comes back to these text-based adventure games. MMOs are based on text-based adventure games because you have the idea of MUDs, the multi-user dungeons. Visual novels ultimately take their cues from text-based adventure games. These point-and-click adventure games we're talking about, you know, it all ultimately comes back here. And I think in a lot of ways what you see in the modern era is that Telltale games become a catalyst in their own right to rejuvenate a lot of franchises that, or not franchises, but genres that people thought had died, and inspire new variations on them as well. Because then you get into what is one of my personal favorite indie games the last few years, Road 96. It's not a point and click adventure game by any means, but it has the same kind of spirit because you are ultimately, kind of wandering through. It's not necessarily a puzzle game, but it's a very story heavy, dialogue focused game where you're essentially picking your path as you hitchhike across the country. There's a lot more to it than that, and it ultimately voyages into like multiple endings and so on and so forth. But I think you realize that in the post Telltale era, there are so many different things people are starting to do with the idea of story-based adventure games, whether that be the return to the old style of point and clicks, or whether it be more adventurous things, more in line with modern gaming. I think we see it as a turning point and kind of the synthesis of the old with the new.
Mm-hmm. Like, what is it? Leisure Suit Larry just came out with a sequel to its own new game that they came out only a few years ago.
They're still making
it is still a hilarious
games?
parody.
How is Leisure Suit Larry still alive?
Yeah, who knew that was going to survive?
Wasn't on my bingo card.
Monkey Island, I don't think that they have another plan for another game, but like I said, Monkey Island came out 2022 with a lot of its original creator work, and Monkey Island has, out of all point-click adventure games, I think Monkey Island is the series that managed to outlast all the other series that are out there. It's been mentioned a ton by Naughty Dog Studios. There's usually there's a picture that you can find, which is a reference to Guybrush Threepwood in, I think, Uncharted 2 or 3, one of those. But also with that, it's got its own Telltale games list, along with its own game that came out recently, along with the original games from the Monkey Island series. And that one's hopped around from, unlike a lot of point-and-click adventure games are usually on the PC and only for the PCs, except for Monkey Island. That one was on the PlayStations for a while.
Yeah, and it's one of a handful of series that got ported even to like mobile devices.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can play quite a few of the Monkey Island games on iOS.
Yeah, also doesn't take a whole lot of space.
No, it really doesn't. They're pretty compact games.
So that's sort of at the tail end of this monkey tail end of this story on this
monkey tail end.
So before I let this go, what is one of, if you could recommend a point-click adventure game that you personally played through, which is one that you would give, either because of its story, or one for its difficulty, or two for its story? Like, if I'm going to start with this off, if I'm going to go with story, I'm going to probably go with if I'm going to go with difficulty, I'm going to go with actually Day of the Tentacle. It's a easy game to get into. The puzzles are very well logic, so it's actually, so you outside of I think one puzzle on there, you can easily get around to solving on that, and it's a good starter place. But if I have to go with story, since I've just gotten through that, I would go with Grim Fandango on that one. That's a solid pick.
I guarantee you after this, like I'm going on a trip for a couple of days after we finish recording this. The second I get back, I'm starting Grim Fandango again. I guarantee you. It's going to happen.
AJ, so if you wanted to pick one, is it Grim Fandango is the one you'd pick for?
I feel like if you just wanted to sample the genre and just dive in the deep end, get one game to encompass everything that these games can be, it has to be Grim Fandango.
Mm-hmm.
But I have so many qualifiers to that. Because then I have like, okay, well, if you want one that's like a big nostalgia hit, like you think you may have played him as a kid, then I would recommend the one I know I played as a kid, which is Mystery Mountain. I think it's one of the Jumpstart games. Yeah. I remember that one so vividly. And I think a lot of people our age don't realize that they grew up on point and click games.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the Humongous games and the Jumpstart games are like the fastest way to reveal like, no, you grew up on this. We promise.
Fooled you. You got one.
If you need a way to get into it, like you need something pulling you in other than the game itself, Fate of Atlantis. It's an Indiana Jones game. It is like the archetypical Indiana Jones romp. It's so much fun. It's such a good game. But at the end of the day, I think my two choices would either have to be, if you're not sure you want to get into it, play Fate of Atlantis. If you know you want to get the best taste you can, play Grim Fandango.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Dane?
For me, I think Tales from the Borderland I really, really enjoyed, but I'm a big Borderlands fan, so that wasn't really surprising. I'd say if you like the Borderlands story, but not necessarily the gameplay, I would recommend that one for sure. Additionally, the Nancy Drew games I really enjoyed, actually. Strangely.
I think like they've still been doing those like as recently as the Wii.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
I'm pretty
Oh,
sure
yeah, I
they've
keep
gone
forgetting.
beyond
Yeah.
that. I'm pretty sure they're still like actively coming out. They're just way slower now.
They
Yeah.
probably are, yeah.
Yeah.
They're just
So
a fun
probably
little
Nancy Drew is right up there with Monkey Island, staying the course.
yeah, you fun little mystery romp. If you know anything about Nancy Drew, you understand the plot of the game. Like, but you know what you're in for. I don't know. It's just a fun time.
Oh, the last one released in 2019.
Huh.
But apparently there's one that's supposed to release sometime this year.
Almost getting up there.
Day one.
One day I'll defeat you, Nancy Drew.
Day one by Nancy Drew. Pre-order now.
Yeah. All right, Tim.
Okay, so I have 3 ways this can go. Based on my pure nostalgia, any of the humongous games before the Atari takeover, because God, the Atari era games are just awful.
Isn't that how
I
it
could get into
always
that, but
goes?
not time for it.
Nah.
If you
Yeah,
want,
Life's a bitch, and then Atari buys you out.
if you want one that is more in line with the modern sensibilities, The Wolf Among Us is a fantastic noir.
Very good, yeah.
Super good.
But I'd say if you want one game to encompass everything that a point-and-click adventure, frustrations, all the joys, all the humor, King's Quest VI.
Mm-hmm. You're never go wrong with a King's Quest game. It's good. King's Quest is probably the easiest one to get into. Yeah, going back to like what it is, like having hard puzzles. Not everyone wants to play that kind of game. But yeah, so that is sort of the end of this. If you our audience out there wanted to just send a list and or just tell us on Twitter or any of our social medias, what is a game that the point click genre that you really enjoy? What is one that you like? You'll be surprised which ones are out there that you may enjoy, or in most modern cases, you may not think is actually turns out to be a point-click adventure game. Honestly, when in World of Horror, thinking that was a RPG, I was wrong. That was a point-click.
Yeah, and that's the thing that really messes with a lot of people when you tell them, like, oh yeah, Telltale games are just point-and-click adventure games. They're just presented differently.
They have? Yes. Yep, that's it. That should be wrapping us up on this one. Our next episode will be out on...
Hi, Leo from the editing room. Just to let everyone know, the next episode will actually be on August 16th coming out. Well, back to the show.
That being said, to audience out there, this is Gaming Theater Podcast. Logging out. Bye, everybody.
Gaming Theater Podcast is hosted, created, produced, and edited by Leo Garcia, the Geek Scorpio. Our music is A Drinking Game. Stock media provided by Stormwave Audio /Pond5. Our cover art is by Adam Parker. You can find him at ParkerGFX on Twitter. If you want to send us some money to help with these episodes, you can do so at patreon.com/gamingtheaterpresents. Want to send support that doesn't hit your wallet? Please leave a review with wherever you hear your podcasts and share our podcast with your friends. It really helps out. Thank you for listening.